Patrick, it's Cindy. I'm submitting assignment 2, personal reflections. Well, week 2, the personal reflection assignment, and I'm saying hello to you from the Black Hills of South Dakota. So in this personal reflection, I would like to talk about something that I talked about last week, or thought about last week. It's kind of a process that I think's been reflected in a lot of our readings last week and this week, and here's what I mean. I've got a deeper connection, I think, this week, deeper understanding, deeper commitment, maybe a little more confidence about the need to connect with students and families and communities. And I think that's important to do first, and allowing a teacher or me to tap into the students and their families' funds of knowledge, so I can use those, we can use those together, leading to the ability to really collaborate or partnership with families and communities that will enable us better to decide and take action, to partake in activism that benefits communities and everybody. So this sort of theme of going from connecting and knowing students and knowing their environment and community to eventually taking action for real substantial change, institutional change, I think is reflected in a lot of our readings. So I'm going to start with readings and kind of jump off from there about thoughts I've had about them. So I want to go back first to a reading we had last week. It was the Group 2's reading, Understand and Advocate for Communities First. And one of the statements made by the authors in that article was, educators have the power to define parent-school relationships. And actually I like the word family better than parent, because I think it's more inclusive. Not all students are raised by parents. But what I liked about that sentence was the acknowledgement that teachers have power in the family-school dynamic. And schools have power. The way our culture has defined schools and teachers as authority figures. And I think it's important to recognize that as we're getting to know our students and trying to build collaboration and greater equality and partnership, recognizing the power dynamic. And another thing in that article from last week was the idea that a constant presence in the community helps to build trust and build that kind of collaboration. And that can be done by regular visits of students in their homes, attending community organization meetings, events, spiritual services, getting feedback from students, and engaging in community-based activist work. So I kind of brought us back to that because I feel like this week's articles and thinking and activities kind of jumped off of that and gave more of the same. So I'll talk next about Gloria Ladson-Billings' article. I really appreciate her as an author. I've had to read some other things by her in the past. I like this idea of the achievement gap being related to the to debt, an achievement debt. Actually, both Jean Anion in the Radical Possibilities, which, by the way, I love that title, Radical Possibilities, is a great way to say it, good thing to think about. But both Jean and Gloria talk about history and economics. And one of the things I realized is I know very little about economics. I have my own idea about how capitalism does not serve those who start out with less money. Really, it helps wealthy people get wealthier, but in reading about the economic debt, financial debt, and reading Anion's chapter 1 made me think there's a lot I could learn about economics. So someday when I have more time, maybe I'll do some studying. But I think it's important to think about the idea there's not just an achievement gap, but there's a debt. There's something owed. There's not equal footing that we're starting off on to just have some Band-Aid improvements to shift the achievement gap, but actually real economic inequities that do not result in an equal starting point for people to achieve educationally or in any realm. So filling in that debt, paying back that debt is something we need to do. I guess I'll throw in that, and then they went on to talk about activism, both of them did. In chapter 11, Anyan kind of goes through steps, and I already said this in one of my posts, but I like the concrete ideas of actions that can be taken for teachers or anyone to actually cause some collaborative activist work to do. And some of Anyan's points were bringing critical thinking into the curriculum to evaluate history and why inequity exists, and getting out of the classroom, bringing students out into the community. That's actually the sentence I took from Anyan, page 172. We cannot stay in the classroom, we must engage in political contestation. I didn't know what contestation was, so I looked it up, found some interesting definitions. But I guess the main meaning I got out of it was be willing to have some conflict, be willing to face disagreement, and struggle with a difficult concept. I think of political activism as generally involving conflict and hopefully good dialogue, but sometimes some uncomfortableness. So I want to say a little about activism and some of how what I'm reading has impacted my thinking about activism. A lot of the activist work that I've been involved in has been white-led. One example is the Stop the Bomb Trains work that's been going on locally in Albany. The Vulcan Oil coming through the south end of Albany, right next to the Ezra Prentice housing project, which is largely inhabited by people of color, low-income people. And a lot of the organizing meetings and even the rallies were white-led, and had a lot of us white folks going to them with our signs. And I felt a real disconnect in that organizing effort and with the people of Ezra Prentice, the people of color who were really most affected by the bomb trains going right in their backyard. If there ever was an explosion, it would be particularly devastating to those folks. So kind of going back to the readings and the collaboration and the being in the community and the working together to decide how an action is going to be carried out and what the priorities are, and including people of color in the meetings with city leaders and with the police when such actions are set up is very important. I'm going to jump and talk a little more about activism and how I feel like our culture, our dominant culture, white-based culture, white, male, straight, wealthy based culture, at least those are the folks that have the most power in our culture. That's what I mean by dominant culture. Has an impact in looking at education and really in so many aspects of our life. Last night I went to a lighting ceremony of Mount Rushmore, which was very patriotic, with lots of flags all over the place and patriotic songs, and really the glorification almost of 4 white men who were presidents of this country. And as I watched the crowd, I felt like this seems so normal to so many people. Yes, this is who we revere, this is what we do, this is what we sing, almost without thinking. And when I was thinking about, the achievement gap and a lot of talk we've been doing about how low-income schools need to be helped, low-income schools need to be improved, I also think that, wealthier schools need to be changed. Schools that teach, that Mount Rushmore is the epitome of, what U.S. values and ideals are, also need to be changed and broadened. Today we're going to go to Crazy Horse Monument, and I'm much more looking forward to being at a Native monument. Native wasn't designed by Native people, it was designed to honor Native people. I think it was a German man that came up with the design and actually started the blasting of the mountain. But just thinking about how much of our culture has these assumptions about what's the standard, and for activism to really take hold, we've got to really question, and challenge that, have some contestation about that. Okay, so in wrapping up, oh no, I want to also, when I was thinking about Crazy Horse, Gloria Ladson Billings in her article actually made a link with Native Americans. The history of American Indian education is equally egregious, and I was thinking about how the boarding schools, and particularly the Carlisle School, I think is the most famous. That was an educational system that took Native people in, actually stole Native people, and sent them off to the boarding schools where their hair was cut and their culture was really taken away from them. They were not allowed to speak native languages or practice any of their culture, with this idea somehow that the white way was the best, like our educational values and dominant culture now is just sort of infused as, well, this is the best, and it's not necessarily. And as I know you know, because you made a comment in our discussion thread, I've been listening to For White Folks Who Live in the Hood, and everybody, for white folks who teach in the hood, and everybody else too. I'm not remembering the total full name, but Christopher Edman, he writes a lot about Native people in the beginning, and he compares people of color, students of color in low-income schools and neighborhoods, and he calls them the neo-indigenous folks, kind of again linking between culture being stolen or taken away. And so I'm thinking a lot about that, how standard schools where students are supposed to be quiet and well behaved in a certain way is seen as the best. And Christopher Edman talks about even when he was a student feeling like he had to be someone other than himself to make the world a better place. And I guess the word I might choose, I'm calling that my media piece, is teachable and not teachable. Who is teachable and who is not teachable, and what does that mean? Because he talks about when he was first a teacher, he looked at the students with all the other new teachers, looked at the students as they walked in the door, and who is teachable and who is not teachable, and who he deemed to be teachable or they. He was starting to question this already, but were the students who fit this standard behavior, this sort of dominant way of being in a classroom, quiet, demure, raising their hand all the time, no disruptions, not moving about in the classroom. And that may not be the cultural reality of many of our students. So how can we open our teaching to really welcome everyone, recognize individuals, their cultures, and what they really need? I know I'm going over my time. I feel like I have a lot more I could say, but I guess I'll bring it back to the walk for now. I had fun on that walk. It was cool to, I have walked that strip so many times, but to slow down and take a lot of pictures and pay more attention to what was there was a good thing for me. And what was most meaningful was not at a political event or an activist event, which are often very meaningful to me, and I'm not saying they're not important, but that day-to-day connection with the girl holding the stoop sail. And I'm looking forward not just to partaking in political rallies. I'm hoping there's one in Albany today in response to what went on in Charlottesville yesterday. But just some fun day-to-day connections with things that kids want to do, like sell their old books. So thank you for that assignment. So have a great day. Bye, Patrick.